All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us for our webinar on No Limits Literacy Information Access and Mobility. Before we get started, I want to let you know that I have muted you if you tried speaking, but we do have a chat option if you're joining us via your computer where you can type in your questions, and I'm also going to put in some information in there. However, there will also be a question and answer session at the end. So if there's a question that you would like to ask, you can also access it with your voice at the end of the panel. We have a couple of other professional learning opportunities coming up. I just want to make you aware of some of those. And you can check up all of our videos on our YouTube page. I'm going to post a link in the chat box. We have one on robotics and coding on the 30th of May, a UEB overview on the 3rd of June, quality assessments on June 4th, charge syndrome on June 5th, and CVI, the third part of our CVI, on June 12th. So feel free to join us. And I am going to go ahead and turn it over to our presenters. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sharon Maneki. I'm the Director of Legislation and Advocacy for the National Federation of the Blind of Maryland. And I have been wearing many hats for the Federation over the years. And thank you very much for inviting us. And with me is...
Hello, my name is Henley Williams. I work at the Image Center for People with Disabilities in Towson. And I also do some freelance writing for a web design company. And I'm also doing work with Sharon, volunteering with the NFB of Maryland.
And Henley is a product of the Maryland public school system. And you graduated from?
I graduated from Carver in 2012. And then I went to Villanova University and graduated in 2016 with my degree in English.
Okay, so let's get started. We could have talked about many things. It was hard to limit ourselves to an hour, and so you may say to yourself, well, why didn't you talk about this or that? And if you invite us back again, maybe we will. But anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the National Federation of the Blind. We accepted this information because we really want to enhance our partnership with the teachers of blind students. We're going to call you TBS for short, and parents of blind students throughout the state. The parent is the student's first teacher and certainly has expertise about his child. And the teacher of blind students certainly has expertise. But the National Federation of the Blind also has expertise based on collective experience. We live with blindness 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So if there is a partnership between our three perspectives, the quality and the opportunity for education will increase. And that's what it's all about. So for us, the term blind covers all ranges: totally blind, visually impaired, legally blind, the whole gamut, because the barriers that must be overcome are the same. The National Federation of the Blind knows that blindness is not the characteristic that defines you or your future. Every day we raise the expectations of blind people because low expectations create obstacles between blind people and our dreams. You can live the life you want. Blindness is not what holds you back. Let's go over to the next slide. So, the process of obtaining a quality education is similar to building a house. You need a solid foundation and durable building blocks. The Individualized Education Program, IEP, is really the foundation for blind students because it outlines the services and the goals and the objectives that are necessary for the student to reach his full potential. Blind students need an education that does not just focus on the mechanics of Braille and assistive technology and mobility. Blind students need an education that teaches the student to problem solve. If the handout in the class is not in Braille, what do you do? If the battery dies in your note-taking technology, what happens? What can you do? If you get lost in the parking lot, how do you figure out the way out? So that's why I like that definition that Malcolm X came up with. He said that education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. So let's talk a little bit about the IEP in the next slide. We have these questions that we think the TBS and the parents should always consider when developing every IEP. So, of course, preparing for the future, making sure the student is age appropriate, making sure the IEP is free of biases, of low expectation, and other attitudinal barriers. Does the IEP offer instruction in the use of a wide variety of tools? And is the student empowered to select the best tool to complete a given task? And we'll come back to all of these questions as we go along in talking about the building blocks of literacy and information access and mobility. So we have the next slide. They're not the safeguards that you get when parents get the book. These are particular safeguards that we like that are good for blind students. We want to make sure that our unique needs for literacy and mobility are not overlooked or ignored. So it's really up to the TBS and the parent to make sure that there's a real discussion of the benefits of Braille and mobility. Many times in an IEP, they just check the box. That box is there for a reason. So please make sure you discuss it thoroughly. Now, we also have some safeguards in Maryland that make sure that the parent has the opportunity to fully participate. So the parent must receive the proposed IEP, including the goals and objectives, 5 business days before the meeting, so that they can prepare their input and their questions. Also, many times parents forget to get the completed IEP, and it's supposed to be also given to you 10 days after, within 10 days after. If English is not the parent's first language, they have to receive the completed IEP in their language within 30 days of the request. And if the parent is blind, the parent has to get the IEP in an accessible format. So these things are for your benefit. Now, when the NFB goes to an IEP, we're really there at the invitation of the parent. The parent doesn't invite us, we don't go. We also can and want to be an ally for the TBS. We can say things to officials that a TBS can't say because they're an employee of the school system. We can say that student must have that $3,000 note taker or whatever equipment it might be. We can also help the TBS with a reluctant parent that's trying to struggle about whether the child could benefit from a white cane. So we have a two-pronged focus. We help the individual, but we also strive to make systemic changes. And so you'll see as we proceed that we talk about some of the laws that we have that we've worked to create, and we work also to get those laws enforced. So now let's move on and talk about one of these laws and our first building block that we're going to talk about today, and that's literacy. Now, too many blind students leave school without basic literacy skills. For the past 4 decades, the National Federation of the Blind has been working to reverse this trend. So the many states have bills like we have laws that like we have in Maryland, the Literacy Rights and Education Act. And in this next slide, we're talking about who's blind. Now, we all know the legal definition of blindness, so we didn't put it in the slide, but of course that's one. But the Literacy Act has a broadening that's very, very helpful. It says that if a student has a medically indicated expectation of visual deterioration, they should be considered blind for terms of this law. In other words, if a person has a RP, if a person has levers and other things where there's going to be deterioration in life. The other thing that it says is that if a student has a medically diagnosed limitation in visual functioning that restricts the child's ability to read and write standard print at levels expected of other children at comparable ability and grade level. So that's an important expansion. Let's go to the next slide about instruction. So the law presumes that everyone who is blind needs Braille instruction unless the IEP team determines that they don't. And there are several things that are supposed to be considered, such as the use of, such as an evaluation of the child's reading and writing skills, needs an appropriate reading and writing media, future literacy needs. And the law also says a very important thing. You cannot deny Braille instruction just because the child has some remaining vision. So Hindley, why don't you talk a little bit about your experience?
Sure. So I was born partially blind. I had some of my vision. And so I had a little bit of usable vision as I was entering school, 4, 5, and 6, around those ages, I would say. And so I have glaucoma, and it was medically diagnosed that I was going to be losing my vision later throughout my life, and it was going to be a degenerative condition. And so I learned Braille, and I also learned a little bit of print. I had some usable vision. And so as I was learning Braille, I got to use different things like I started out on the Braille writer very early on, and I learned about the Braille cell when I was 4 years old. So Braille has been a part of my life for a very long time. And so eventually, when I was 12 and I did lose my vision, I was in the middle of junior high, and I was taking a variety of different classes. I had a full school load at the time, and I was in public school. And so no one else around me was reading Braille. And so when I did finally lose my vision, I was fully prepared for what I needed. I didn't have to take any time off of school or anything like that. I had all the tools that I needed to kind of move forward with that.
And great. So Hindley is a beneficiary of the Maryland Literacy Rights and Education Act because it was passed in 1992. And where were you in 1992?
I wasn't here yet. So yes, I'm definitely beneficiary.
Good. Okay, so let's talk about future literacy needs. So it's hard to think about the future when a student is in kindergarten and first grade, but it really needs to be done. So we have provided you with a future needs literacy inventory. You can make your own up. This is just a concept. This is just a thinking point. And there are several questions on there. The one that I like the two that I like are, how many books does the student read for pleasure in a year? That's something that we see if a person is struggling, they're not going to be reading. Another one that I like is, can the student efficiently look back and forth between two different documents, such as a passage from a play and corresponding list of questions? So I think it's easy to fall into traps, and we have a little document there about some of the traps that you can fall into that we hope you will avoid.
Is that working?
One that I think is particularly poignant is, we can make accommodations for your son's eyesight. He will only have to do enough math problems to demonstrate proficiency.
Okay.
So I want you to think about that. What's the problem with that? And when you're in the office, when it's work, and the boss says, I need 5 documents at close of business today, you're going to tell the boss, well, I only did 2. You can, but will you last in that job? Of course not. So the traps came from a book by Carol Castellano called Getting Ready for College Begins in 3rd Grade. And that's an intriguing title. It's a very appropriate title. And certainly invite you to read the book and to avoid the traps. So let's go to the integrating print and Braille slide. There are many students who should have the opportunity to learn print and Braille to achieve efficiency. It's really about efficiency. But I think it's important to remember that you're not just teaching the mechanics of Braille. You're teaching the use, the integration into life, into the experiences, and into habits. And many times, people will say, well, this student is a visual learner. What you have to think about is, are they a visual learner because that's all they know? Now, think about it. You have to give students the opportunity to problem solve. You've got to present them with the idea. Is it faster, for example, to scan the chapter of a book in Braille or in print to find the answer to a question? The answer is depending on that student and that student's ability, but it's the integration that matters. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So when I was young, and I'm going to reference kind of my 1st grade experiences, when I was at that time, my teachers for the visually impaired would say things to me like, maybe we want to use Braille for this assignment because you're going to be doing a lot of writing. And so, if I was going to be doing a lot of writing, it was going to be harder for me to look back at the print and be able to read quickly what I wrote. And so I would take out a wipe-off board with a marker during handwriting so that I could see what I was writing and I could see the shapes of the letters and know what was going on. But for other assignments where my vision just wasn't strong enough to promise me comprehension on everything and promise that I was going to get all the information, I would use Braille. And that was outlined by my teachers for me. And that was a model that I continued to use until I lost my vision.
Great. Okay. That's an important point because we have to be able to communicate with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an important thing to remember. So now let's talk about fluency and reading speed. They should always be on the IEP. There should always be goals about them. Now, if a student is in the 8th grade and is expected to read 150 words a minute. Should a Braille reader be expected to read at the same rate? How many words a minute do you read?
So I read 200 words a minute.
And that's great. That's great. So it can be done. I think that frequently it isn't stressed as much as it needs to be. One of the most good examples, best examples that we have for partnership between parents and teachers and the National Federation of the Blind are our work on the Braille standards. So that's the next line, right? So Maryland follows the Common Core standards in education, and since there are standards for students who read and write print to meet, there should be standards for students who read and write Braille. And so we got busy and got a law created to tell the Department of Education to create standards for Braille. And you should, as parents, go to the link and read those standards, because that's a benchmark for you. That tells you where your student should be in second grade. And don't forget to look at the appendices that are there, because it's very well laid out. But it was something that we could not have done by ourselves. It was a better product because all of us worked on it together. And these standards are for both reading, writing, and math. And of course, many of us know about the Nemeth Code, but the important thing is, well, when should the student be learning the given parts of the Nemeth Code? That standard helps you remember that. So now, let's talk about our favorite program, the Bell Academy, Braille Enrichment, Literacy, and Learning. This is a unique program. It differs from some of the other camps that are around because it really is, because of its emphasis on positive attitudes and because the instructors are blind, and so the young student has role models to see. Many times students come and they've never seen a blind adult. I remember I was reading a story and the student kept saying, "Is she blind?" And then he kept saying, "Is she still blind?" So anyway, it is a 2-week program. We have 3 in Maryland, 1 in Baltimore for Baltimore City and surrounding counties, 1 in Glendale for Montgomery and PG, and 1 in Salisbury for Wycomico and Worcester and Dorchester and so forth. So we're going to show you some pictures because, you know, pictures, what is it? Pictures are better than 1,000 words, something like that. So Braille is an important feature of every Bell Academy. And it was, the reason we started is because parents asked us to. Parents were concerned. Parents didn't feel that there was enough time or immersion in Braille. So then we have 2 slides of pictures of people doing various things with their white cane. And you see that these are life experiences. So certainly you need to know how to cross the street, but you also need to know how to carry objects and hold your cane and use your cane at the same time, so forth. We have another picture, feeling what you draw, and that enhances. Of course, we need to have fun, and so students have different experiences with food. And at the same time as they're having fun with food, they're also increasing their tactile skills. And then we have field trips. Everybody needs field trips, right? And then my favorite slide, expanding horizons. The boy sitting up there in the tree. And you know, his mother was so excited. She said, "Oh, I never thought that my son would be able to climb a tree." It's a very ordinary thing, but we can have those ordinary experiences too. So we hope that parents will enroll, not too late, enroll your student in a Bell Academy, and we hope that teachers will come and volunteer and be part of this because it's a great program.
And it's a ton of fun.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about assistive technology because it's one of the greatest barriers for people, blind people of all ages, is access to information. And as we said, blind students need to be able to communicate with themselves. So the Texas School for the Blind put out these principles, which you have there on your slide. And I wanted to just highlight two of them. One is that number 2, it says that assistive technology is equivalent to pencil and paper for non-disabled students. So, Henley, what assistive technology do you use?
Sure. So I mostly use JAWS on my laptop computer. That's what I use most of the time. But I also have a Braille display, which I use. It helps keep me organized and stuff like that. I used it all through school. Baltimore County Public Schools made sure that I had a Braille display starting at 9 years old. They let me take it home and play around with it and learn about it and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what I did. And then I got more of an extensive exposure to JAWS once I was in high school. And then I was, after some training, able to use that for research projects while I was in high school and that kind of stuff. So.
Good, good. So I'm going to tell you what Principle 4 says because this is another important, they're all important, but this is one I want to highlight. It says, use of assistive technology does not automatically make educational and commercial software tools accessible or usable. And so parents and TBS, you have got to be advocates for accessibility, especially parents, you're taxpayers. You're paying for, you're indirectly, we all indirectly pay for education. And if your student isn't getting what they need because of lack of accessibility, you should be squawking about it. And we'll help you. So we have another slide here on skills. Some people think that keyboarding is an ancient art. It's not needed anymore. We disagree with that, don't we?
Yes, we do. We do. I remember when I was trying to figure out how to keyboard in the early days, and I asked someone if I should be putting Braille labels on my keyboard. So we believe that a blind person is able to keyboard with just being able to feel the little tactile indications on the F and the J, and do so just as quickly as a sighted person. And that's very, very important to be able to do that, and be efficient in the workplace and in school.
Now, I want you to think about something. So, students really need to use multiple tools. So, if a blind student, should they be able to use a laptop in the classroom, even if other students are not using it? The answer is yes, because we need to learn what print formats look like. We need to, because we have to be able to communicate with the rest of society. And so what we're saying is that Braille note takers are great and they definitely need to be used, but so does the PC. You know, what we're trying to do is help create a balanced experience for students. They have to learn multiple tools so that they can be efficient. It's all about being efficient. I don't think anybody ever talks about efficiency in the IEP. They should.
Yes, they should.
So one other thing that I would say is that in Maryland, there is a technology requirement. Everybody has to take a technology course. And it is really up to the TBS to make sure that the student has something meaningful to do in that class. Did you take a technology course?
I did, and I used it as study hall. So there you go. It's very important to take that time and to use that. I remember when I was in high school, I used a lot of my summers to try to figure out assistive technology, and that's fine. Like that worked for me, but that's not what, like if other students are getting a certain kind of education, all students need to get that same education.
Right. And unfortunately, sometimes the student is in the technology class and all they're hearing is click this and click that.
Yes, and that doesn't make any sense.
Right, right. So you can't possibly teach the student every technology that there is, and every technology is changing. But you do have to expose them. You do have to create that problem-solving experience so that they can figure out what's going to be useful for this task, what's going to be useful for that task. You don't want the student to be afraid of technology either. So they have to really get used to it. You can't break the thing usually.
I think just trying to adopt an exploratory mindset in that regard is really important.
Okay, let's talk about textbooks on time. We did get a law to help with that process. Now, many of you might, and you can read that law, and you might be saying, well, people don't use textbooks as much as they used to. That's true, but we still need the printed material. Now, there's a new regulation coming out, and we have given you the link there that you can go read it. It's actually going to be updated because it says that the TBS, that the local school system may coordinate with the National Instructional Materials Accessibility Center, and it's going to be changed to say shall. So in other words, it's really, the textbook files really have to go to the NIMAC. It's very important because once they're there, other people can use them, and we don't want the student getting the textbook in November. We want them getting it the first day of school because it is possible. You know, there was a time when it wasn't possible due to the lack of technology and so on and so forth. But it's possible now. And so we all need to make sure it happens. So let's look at, we also have a lot of technology, instructional technology. We have laws for that. And there's another regulation called the Accessibility of Digital Learning Resources. And that's going to be updated because the WCAG II is now in version 2.1. That's guidelines for accessibility. So the next slide that we have there is taking the accessibility fight to companies, and the National Federation of the Blind really works very hard to do that. For example, Amazon had proposed a $30 million contract with the New York City Public Schools to provide e-books and other electronic services in the classroom. The system was called Caste, and New York City postponed the contract because of the information and the publicity that they received from the National Federation of the Blind about the lack of accessibility. So Amazon suddenly decided to work with the NFB to make this system accessible. So the NFB has a deliberate strategy of trying to get the large vendors to do the right thing. Because if we can get the large vendors to do the right thing, then the small vendors will get the message too. And we really do prefer partnerships, but we will sue if we have to, because we're not going to back down. We're not going to take accessibility as a way of life, because we need our accessibility. You wanted to say anything on this before we go on to mobility?
I think we're good. I think you covered it really well. Yeah.
Okay. So one thing that I would say, I did give you some. You can read more about that case in the Braille Monitor. The Braille Monitor is a magazine that is published monthly by the National Federation of the Blind. And if you want to know what's going on in the field of blindness, that's your go-to magazine. All right, let's talk about mobility. So, the question to think about is, does the student have the same level of freedom as his peers? So, when you're talking about mobility in the IEP, you have to think about, I think it's better, instead of saying, does your child need a white cane, to say, can your child benefit from a white cane? I think that makes parents feel a little better. But the important thing is that it gets talked about. So we have a document which gives some suggestions about thinking about whether your child needs a cane. So one that I liked is this one. I like them all, but this is a special one. Is the child able to easily discern when there is a drop-off, such as a curb, or does he have to slow down, move very cautiously, and feel with his foot? So I'm ancient, so things are done better now than when I went to school. I got a cane when I was in high school. I was certainly needed a cane my whole life, but that was the belief at that time. Of course, the worst time of your life when you're very self-conscious, so on and so forth. When did you get a cane?
I had a cane when I was 6, and I resisted it for 10 years actively. And I used it all throughout school, even though I didn't like the way it made me look, and it took a long time for me to accept it. I started using a cane when I was 6, and then slowly I started to understand that I was learning a lot about my world all the time, like little details, and so.
So it was important that somebody persevered with
yes.
and didn't
and introduced it early and just said, like, this is something you can hold in your hand. It shows you where obstacles are, and like slowly I just got more and more used to that concept. And now it's my cane. It's how I get around the world. And without that early introduction, that was definitely critical for me.
Yeah, you can develop lots of bad habits if you don't start it early.
It's true.
And
keeping your head down.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think really what we're saying is use your eyesight for what you can see and use your cane for what you can't.
Absolutely.
So let's move on to the orientation and mobility law. So let me tell you a story. One of the people who testified when we were trying to get this law passed told what happened to her. So she wanted to get a part-time job in high school, and she succeeded in getting a job at McDonald's. So then she told her boss that she couldn't work after sundown. Why? Because she couldn't find her way home. Now, do you think she lasted in this job? And is this freedom? We have to think about those questions that we had in the very beginning. Doing age-appropriate things. She didn't know about a cane. Nobody ever told her about mobility. And many times we found that that was happening because people had some vision. So this was another cooperative law that we worked on with the Maryland School for the Blind and the State Steering Committee. And it was passed, and you see the link if you want to go read the law, you can. And you also see the link for the assessment. So the important thing is to keep discussing it. It creates an assumption that all blind students need mobility unless the IEP team determines that they don't. And it also has the provision that you cannot be denied mobility just because you have some usable vision or some vision. This is one of those areas where we have to be real careful about biases and attitudes and that kind of thing. So let's go to the importance of the white cane slide. So, you know, this is more, teaching mobility is more than a class. You really, just like technology is more than a class, and Braille is more than a class. You're giving a student foundation for life. So as we said, children should receive canes as early as possible. Now, I want to remind parents that the goals ought to be changing on the IEP every year for mobility. And if they're not, then you need to speak up about it and investigate why they're not changing or develop different objectives. So we have suggested some articles that you can read which really underscore the NFB philosophy on cane travel. And there are two, one by Dr. Fred Schroeder and the other one called The Change, whatever it's called, The Change Model no, it's called The Promotion Model, sorry about that. And that's by Joe Cutter. And the important thing is that these articles came from Future Reflections, which is another great resource for parents and teachers. This particular article that we're referring to brings you to Future Reflections. That whole issue was about mobility, but they're not all, sometimes they're a whole issue on a given subject, and sometimes they're mixed. So before we leave the subject of mobility, remember that as the child moves through elementary and middle school, their level of independence should be increasing. And there's a very good article by Gary Wonder talking about whose responsibility is it. And if you think about freedom, I think it will help with the whole concept of using a cane and so forth. Emily, anything to add?
I don't I just want to stress, how important, and I said this before, but I just want to stress how important early introduction of the cane really is. That child is, going to be going throughout his or her life with a cane, and it's going to be part of their image and part of them as a human. And it's just really important to incorporate that as part of their image as early as possible so that it can become empowering to them, so that the cane is part of their safety, is part of their, independence and what helps drive them forward. So I just want to stress that. And I know it's hard with kids because I was a kid who was going to be using a cane and didn't really want to be. So I just wanted to underscore that a little bit more.
Okay, so let's go to the summary slide. We really hope that you will think about preparing your student for the future, that you will think more about problem solving and empowering the student so that they really leave with literacy, with information access, and with mobility skills. And there will truly be no limits if you do all of these things when that student becomes an adult. So I guess we have time for questions if there are any.
And just so everyone knows, you will have access to the PowerPoint with all the links that Sharon and Henley were talking about. I will be emailed to you. I am unmuting everybody in case anyone wants to see. So we actually have a new TBI that's on here, and I'm going to call you out because Emily, hi. She has been participating in all our webinars. I'm really excited. So I don't know, Emily, if you have any questions specifically that you would want to ask or any information that you are interested in.
I'm just trying to think here. I have a newly preschool student who is losing their sight drastically. She's lost it, like I said, drastically within just this year of me having her. She's going to be in kindergarten next year, but I was just wondering if maybe next year would be an appropriate time to mention the Bell camp to the family.
Well, how old is the student?
She just turned 5.
You could come now if you're interested, because it's for students who are 4 to 12. And what's nice about it is that naturally they don't know what's happening and so on and so forth. But when they see other kids, and they're not the only blind, all they know is themselves. They don't know any other blind kids. So it really is a boost of their self-esteem. So I'd go ahead and do it now.
Yeah. Is there any way, I don't know if I'm asking the right question. This is their first child too that is blind. And I didn't know if you had any information that I could give them to have that discussion with their child. Cause she's not, I don't think they've had the conversation yet. She's not really understanding why she's learning Braille. And it's not frustrating, but I'm just having difficulties with trying to teach things that are hand over hand with her because she's just very hesitant.
Yeah, that's understandable. And I think two things. And Henley and Conchita, you can chime in here. I think that we can certainly get you things, but we can also offer the opportunity for her parents to talk to other parents.
Okay.
Because I think that's helpful.
Do you mind emailing it to me?
Yeah. So what I'm going to do tomorrow when I have the YouTube, Miss Conchita, the YouTube video up, is I'm going to send an email to everybody that registered with the PowerPoint, and then Sharon's email will be CC'd,
Okay.
so that way you can definitely reach out to her directly.
Okay.
I think that the hurdle, and parents don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, and
Get
she,
parents
yeah,
communicating with each other.
she's, oh, I'm sorry. She's my first student too that, that is losing their sight over time, because this is just my third year. So my other blind student that I've had, her parents are well aware of her vision impairment, and she's had it since she was born. So I didn't have to like have that discussion with them. So
Sure.
anything that you could send my way will be very helpful.
Are there any other questions from anyone else on this call? Okay, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Sharon and Henry, for coming in and joining us. We really appreciate it. Like I said, tomorrow I will send out the YouTube video along with the PowerPoint, and Sharon's email, so you can email her directly if any follow-up questions or information. All of the documents that Sharon referred to in her presentation is linked in the PowerPoint, so you can go to it, as well as linked to a Google document. So you can do that. And if I can get to the chat box, every single webinar you can receive credits for it. So I'm going to put into the chat box where you can take the survey. So please let us know how you what you thought about the webinar, and you can receive contact hours. I just put it in now. If you are getting it through your PC, it also has all the links to the documents that that Sharon referred to, as well as how to access our survey. So thank you so much.